guys, this video is going to be all about Aries Ascendant, also known as Rising sign. So before we jump into this, I strongly recommend that you view this video, which is an intro to the Ascendant sign, what they're all about, what they mean, how to find what your Ascendant sign is. I will put some timestamps down below, but I will briefly be talking about what the Ascendant is. We'll be talking about how it relates to your appearance, your health, your birth, your persona or personality, and we'll be talking a teeny tiny bit about the descendant as well. So let's jump into it. What exactly is the Ascendant? The Ascendant is a sign that was rising at the time of your birth, so you do have to have your birth time in order to get access to what your Ascendant sign is, and you want to look at your birth chart and see what sign is on that first house cusp. That is your rising or Ascendant sign. The words are interchangeable, they do mean the same thing. So that is what the Ascendant sign is. It has to do with the way that you perceive the world, the way that the world initially perceives you, first impressions, you know, it's a bit of like a security blanket. It's kind of the instinctual personality that you go to when you're in uncomfortable situations, new situations, meeting new people, if you're scared, if you are just kind of unsure. It can tell you about your birth into the world. It can tell you about your physical self, your health, your appearance. So let's jump into exactly how this all plays out with having an Aries rising or an Aries ascendant. So I just want to start off by saying that not every person with their rising in Aries is going to be identical. Of course, other parts of the birth chart play into this. You know, what else is going on in the first house? Are there aspects to the Ascendant? The chart ruler becomes involved, you know, what's going on with that placement. So if you have an Aries rising, your chart ruler is Mars, so you do want to look at Mars in your birth chart because that is a significant placement for you. So let's start off by talking about your appearance. Now, I also want to say this. The Ascendant sign is not the only part of your birth chart that influences your appearance. There are many other indicators that you can look at. I might make a video about this in the future, but because the Ascendant sits on that first house cusp and because the first house has a lot to do with like your physical self, a lot of times Ascendants can be looked at to kind of get an idea of maybe some traits or similarities that people with an Aries rising will have. Again, a lot of other things can play into this, so it's very possible that you might not have all of these, maybe you have some, maybe you have none, but let's jump into it anyways. A lot of Aries risings will have higher or more pronounced cheekbones. They tend to have more angular faces, like maybe a pointed chin, not like a witch's chin, but maybe more like a heart-shaped face. There's often some type of reddish coloring associated with an Aries rising, whether it's red hair. You know, sometimes you kind of see people that have a reddish tinge to their skin. Stuff along those lines. It could manifest in, you know, blemishes or different kinds of skin conditions that make the face appear more of a reddish color. A lot of Aries risings tend to have a more youthful appearance. Many will have somewhat distinctive eyebrows or eyes, so a lot of times you'll see like bushier eyebrows or like very, you know, noticeable eyebrows. I've noticed like sometimes Aries risings tend to have eyes that are smaller or maybe set closer together. Typically when it comes to the body, because of that rulership by Mars, a lot of Aries risings can be muscular or they can be lean but athletic. You know, a lot of times they tend to be in pretty decent shape, not always. They can be shorter than average, but usually something about them is athletic or comes across as strong, whether it is they're just, you know, larger and strong in that way, or they're strong because they can run really fast. There's all different ways it can play out. But typically an Aries rising does tend to be, you know, more on the athletic side or the leaner side, than shorter than typical, not always. When it comes to the nose, a lot of Aries risings have like a little bit of an upturn, like a cute little petite or like pointed nose. Or the alternative is they have kind of like a square, you know, nose, like more of a distinct square shaped nose. So usually you'll see some type of one or the other. Another thing you might notice is, again, that reddish coloring, but many Aries risings just have red hair. So what do we need to know about health when it comes to Aries rising? So the 6th house is often what we look at for health purposes, but the 1st house is important as well because it talks about your body, your physical self, yourself, you know, on a mental level. So a lot of times you can look at your rising sign to see, you know, health concerns that you might encounter throughout your life, whether they be mental health concerns, physical ailments, you know, stuff along those lines. So let's cover those. And again, not every Aries rising is going to experience all of these. if there are other planets in the first chart, or if there's a lot going on, in different parts of the chart, this might not be the case, but a lot of Aries risings might experience issues in anything involving the head, the face, the upper jaw region, because Mars, Aries, they rule the head. So anything involved in this area. Other areas that come into play would have to be the arteries, the adrenal glands. Typically, Capricorn is associated with teeth, but because Mars rules, the head and stuff along those lines, the jaw can be a concern or place of concern for an Aries rising. So you could have, teeth issues, you could have TMJ, that jaw issue, you could be, you deal with a lot of headaches, you might get congestion, sinus issues, anything in the face, anything related to the adrenal glands, so adrenal fatigue, things involving your immune system, your metabolism. Blood pressure is a big one. You might see Aries risings have to deal with having issues with high blood pressure or anything involved in their response to things that worry them or stress them out. Mars rules accidents, it rules burns, cuts, so some Aries risings might have like a scar on their face, a burn, or it just could be that they tend to have to deal with, they might have more bumps and cuts, they tend to be clumsy or get into accidents or anything along those lines. Maybe they've had a concussion or more than one. Mars also rules over the reproductive organs, so that is something that may be of a concern as well. And a lot of times there could be a bit of a burnout for people with their rising in Aries. They could have issues with, doing too much, burning out, being exhausted, dealing with exhaustion. And when it comes to the mental health side of things, Aries risings could deal with depression, with, bipolar. And I'm not saying that every single Aries rising struggles with this. I'm just saying that these could be potentially possibilities. Highs and lows. They could have a lot of worry. They could jump into things impulsively, which could lead to issues down the road, being a bit rash at times. So those are different areas that may become a concern for Aries rising. Of course, they aren't all going to come up all the time, but those are different areas that could present a struggle, depending on, different aspects, different planetary placements in the chart, so on and so forth. So let's talk about what your Aries ascendant has to do with your actual birth. Because Aries is ruled by Mars, you may, as a baby, have come quickly or fiercely into this world. It's hard to know sometimes what your birth story is, but if you do, have an opportunity to learn it, you might find out that there was, an exorbitant amount of strength or courage involved in your particular birth. There may have been issues with your blood pressure or perhaps your mother's during your birth. Any issues involving the head, like we were just talking about with health, may have been involved. Something might have happened that involved an accident, like maybe the birth was early due to an accident or something along those lines. And again, this is not the case for everybody, but that's something that could be part of the birth story. There could be heat or anger or passion involved in the birth in some kind of way. It could have been like one of those situations that was all or nothing. Maybe it was a first-time birth for, your mother because it was like a new experience, or if there had been births before, something about this birth experience was new in comparison to, siblings. So now let's talk about the persona or the personality of the Aries rising person. So an Aries rising might feel thrust into the world as a bit of a pioneer. Aries tend to be natural-born leaders. The sign of Aries is often associated with a natural-born leader, with strength, with courage, with bravery. And I feel like a lot of times Aries risings can be one of two things. You have the Aries rising that is kind of the type that sees the world around them as something exciting, something that they can mold, a bit of a thrill. They see it with curiosity. That is their perception, because the ascendant sign has a lot to do with perception. But you can also have the Aries rising, and this does depend on, early childhood experiences, that sees the world as something that they have to protect themselves from, something that they can't quite trust. To both of these people, Aries risings, the world is a new thing. They feel that. They feel like they are the first one to go forward in it. They're the pioneer. They're the leader. And sometimes, they want that position. They want that role. They like that, part of their persona. And the other times, it's kind of like forced upon them. They're a leader, but it's not a position that they chose for themselves. And again, you kind of have, you might see the world as exciting, new, like something to totally consume, or you might see the world as something that is harsh, something that is cruel, something that you have to protect yourself from and survive in. So you may meet an Aries rising that is like the one who's excited, sees the world in a positive perspective, or you might meet somebody with an Aries rising that has this perception that is not negative, but more so they look at it as not to be trusted, and they're not as trusting, and they don't go into it as confidently. And the second Aries rising that views the world as a bit more harsh might be a bit more closed off, a little bit resentful or angry. That could be a potential. They could be a bit scared, but a lot of times there will be more of a quiet strength or bravery to that type of person. And when you compare it to the other type of an Aries rising, their bravery or strength is much more out in the open, sometimes a little bit too much, you know, like they show it off a bit, but it's almost like fear or hesitation versus, you know, comfort and security. And I've said this in my previous video about the Ascendant signs, but that Ascendant sign is a bit of a security blanket. So there might be Aries signs that kind of let you in a little bit more openly, and Aries rising signs that don't let you in at all. Upon first meeting somebody with an Aries rising, they do tend to be more direct, honest, open, not necessarily not guarded, but they can be open, you know, and adaptable to their surroundings and environment, but they might not, you know, let you in to see their true self. So again, they can be honest, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're handing out information about themselves. Others' perceptions of them tends to be important because they are associated with that first house cusp. You know, Aries is associated with the first house, I am, so the body, the physical self, the state of being. So of course, the perception that others have of them is important to them. And because of that association with the first house, a lot of Aries risings can take their body very seriously, their appearance very seriously. They might work really hard on it. They might be too critical of themselves, you know, deal with body image issues and stuff along those lines, or they might just be very physically active. They might be, you know, into working out, but usually their body is important to them, you know, or is an area of significant either concern or just interest, but a lot of attention goes into that area, the body, for an Aries rising. Their perception of the world tends to be more primal, instinctual, and again, it depends on how they perceive it. Is it in more of a positive, trusting light, or is it in more of, you know, an unsure, kind of untrusting, you know, light? A lot of Aries risings, and I like to always like picture a group of people at a new event, nobody really knows each other. The Aries rising is typically going to be, you know, they might speak first. They can tend to be smart, quick-witted, funny. If, say, you're at an event and somebody's like, oh, who wants to share their experience? And Aries rising might be like the first one to raise their hand, and kind of, they tend to take initiative. They tend to get the ball rolling when other people won't do it. Sometimes they feel forced into this position, but an Aries rising does tend to be a natural leader, and they do tend to take initiative in new or uncomfortable situations instead of shy away from that. And again, sometimes this taking of initiative is to protect themselves. They do it as a way of survival, or other times they just do it because they tend to be more confident, and that's just their natural, that's just the natural way about them. You could meet an Aries rising in an unfortunate situation and have to deal with a quick temper, because that is something that Aries risings might have to deal with as well. A lot of times Aries risings can be quick to judge sometimes, or they quickly assess a situation because, again, they are instinctual, they're on more of like a primal level, and so when they're in a new or uncomfortable environment, or just new, it doesn't always have to be uncomfortable, they can quickly assess it without fully looking into it and make kind of like rash judgments just to kind of feel safe in the moment. They may be the type that interrupts or jumps into things. And again, they do tend to typically be friendlier, or they are the first, even if they don't come across as like friendly, they do tend to be the first to strike up a conversation. And a lot of Aries risings, depending on the situation, will be the one to take charge if the situation or environment calls for that. They could be a bit combative, depending. You know, Aries risings tend to be more of a competitive type of persona. Again, they're strong, they're brave, they can, some of them do tend to show off a bit. And Aries is associated, again, with that first house of self. So sometimes Aries can be a little bit self-absorbed or kind of concerned with, others' perception of them, like their self in a situation, like survival of the fittest, like they're going to be first, they're going to jump into this, they're going to say this, they're going to take the initiative, they're going to be the one in charge, they're going to be the one to lead. Or say you're like on a first date as an Aries rising or with an Aries rising, they might be talking about themselves a lot or kind of like flaunting, their attributes, but it's important to them to let you know the good qualities that they have. They might have a more youthful energy, they might look younger than they are, they might have a lot of energy or enthusiasm, they might be the type to take action. A lot of Aries risings, they take action. They could be a bit impatient, again, they could be rash, they can be very protective of themselves and others that are important to them. They can be very ambitious. Sometimes they can be focused on themselves and get tunnel vision of like making sure that they're good and they're going to succeed and that they're all set and that they're safe and they feel secure. So a bit of their security comes from focusing on themselves and making sure that that is protected. There's a lot of fiery energy with an Aries rising that people probably experience upon first impression, and their urge to just like take care of themselves is very important to them. Now, the descendant of Aries is Libra, so that access of the first house to the seventh house, the opposition there is Libra. So a lot of qualities they tend to look for have to do with like Libra-like traits, qualities they may not be able to access as easily or they may subconsciously push away or attract in other people. So you have the I am versus I balance. So that's something I will get into in a later video, but it's just something as a tiny bit of a takeaway. For Aries risings with any health concerns or anything like that, anything that kind of like cools them off or lets them get the fire out in some way, that fiery energy. So things involved with water, meditating, anything involved with the head, like clearing that space, being able to get any physical energy out. Those are all good outlets to express any like irritations or anger or hard, feelings or emotions within the Aries rising persona. So that is the Aries rising or ascendant. If you're an Aries rising, do you have any of these qualities mentioned in the video? If so, let me know in the comments down below. I will see you in my next video. Thank you so much for watching and have a good day or night.